You were told the minimum payment was a safety net, a lifeline, a reasonable option. Pay this amount, and you're in good standing. Pay this amount, and you avoid penalties. Pay this amount, and everything is fine. But that might be the most expensive lie you've ever been told, because the minimum payment was never designed to help you get out of debt. It was designed to keep you in it. And almost no one explains that clearly. This video is not financial advice. It's not telling you what to do with your money. It's an explanation of how the system actually works, so you can see the rules you were never taught. If you've ever carried a balance on a credit card, if you've ever felt relief just for paying the minimum, if you've ever wondered why the balance never seems to go down, this is for you. The minimum payment feels responsible. That's the trap. It feels manageable. It feels calm. It feels like you're doing what you're supposed to do. But here's the truth that changes everything. The minimum payment is mathematically designed to stretch your debt for as long as possible. Not accidentally, not as a side effect, on purpose. When you open a credit card, the bank doesn't expect you to pay it off quickly. If everyone paid off their balances in a few months, the entire credit card industry would collapse. They don't make money when you borrow. They make money when you stay borrowed. Interest is the product. Time is the profit. And the minimum payment is the tool that turns time into revenue. Look closely at how minimum payments are calculated. They're usually set as a small percentage of your balance, often around 1 to 3%, plus interest and fees. That sounds harmless, but it's not. Because when interest is high, most of your minimum payment doesn't go toward the balance at all. It goes towards servicing the interest. You're not paying off the debt, you're paying for the privilege of keeping it. That's why you can make payments for months, sometimes years, and barely see the number change. The system isn't broken. It's functioning exactly as designed. Here's what they don't say out loud. The minimum payment is calibrated to feel doable while maximizing long-term interest. Low enough that you won't panic. Low enough that you won't stop using the card. Low enough that you'll keep the account alive. Because once the account is alive, the clock keeps running. Interest compounds quietly, daily, relentlessly. And compounding doesn't care how hard you work or how responsible you feel. It only cares about time. This is why people say things like, "I've been paying this card for years and I still owe almost the same amount." They're not exaggerating. They're describing the math. The minimum payment gives you the illusion of progress without actual progress. It tells your brain, you handled it. But the system says, perfect, stay right there. And that illusion is incredibly powerful. Because life is expensive, rent is high, groceries cost more, gas costs more, healthcare costs more. So when the minimum payment shows up, it feels like relief, like mercy. You tell yourself, I'll pay more next month. I just need to get through this week. This is temporary. But months turn into years, and temporary turns into normal. That's not a personal failure. That's behavioral design. The credit system is built around human psychology, not logic, not long-term planning. It's built around stress, relief, and delay. The minimum payment reduces immediate stress, and in exchange, it extends long-term pain. That trade is never explained clearly, because if it were, fewer people would accept it. Think about how this is framed. Credit card statements don't say, if you only pay the minimum, this debt could last decades. They don't say, this choice will cost you thousands more in interest. They say things like, minimum payment due, account in good standing, no late fee applied. Everything about the language is designed to calm you down, because calm customers are profitable customers. And the moment you stop and really understand what the minimum payment does, the calm disappears. Let's make this concrete. Imagine a credit card with a balance of a few $1,000s. The interest rate is high, because most are. You pay the minimum every month, exactly as requested. On paper, you're doing everything right. But behind the scenes, most of your money is being absorbed by interest. Only a tiny fraction touches the principal. The balance shrinks painfully slowly, and as the balance shrinks, the minimum payment shrinks with it. That's another trick. As you owe slightly less, they ask for slightly less, which feels kind, but it stretches the timeline even further. It's like running on a treadmill that quietly slows down just enough to keep you moving forever. This is why credit card debt feels different from other bills. With rent, you pay and it's gone. With utilities, you pay and you reset. With credit cards, paying doesn't end the obligation. It preserves it. You're not exiting the system, you're maintaining it. And this is where shame enters the picture. People blame themselves for not being better with money. They think they lack discipline. They think they're bad at math. They think everyone else has figured something out that they haven't. But the truth is simpler and more uncomfortable for the system. Most people were never meant to pay these debts off quickly. They were meant to service them. That's why minimum payments exist at all. If the goal were to help you become debt-free, the minimum payment would be structured very differently. It would aggressively reduce principal. It would shorten timelines. It would make balances drop fast. But that's not the goal. The goal is predictable, long-term cash flow. Your stress becomes their stability. And once you see that, it becomes harder to unsee. Because you start to notice how often the system praises behavior that benefits lenders, not borrowers. Just pay the minimum. At least you're current. Your credit score is safe. Credit scores reward compliance, not freedom. They reward on-time payments, not debt elimination. They reward consistency, not escape. You can be drowning in debt and still be considered a good customer. And that should make you pause. Because a system that calls you successful while you're financially stuck is not measuring your well-being. It's measuring your usefulness. The minimum payment is where all of this becomes visible. It's small enough to accept, big enough to feel responsible, and slow enough to keep you paying interest for years. That's not an accident. In the next part, we're going to break down exactly how this keeps people trapped, why paying more feels harder than it should, and how the system quietly pushes you back toward minimum payments even when you try to escape. And if at any point in this video you catch yourself thinking, "This explains way too much," you're not alone. That reaction is the point. Here's the part that surprises people the most. Credit card debt doesn't trap only people who can't manage money. It traps people who are doing everything they were told was responsible. People with jobs, people with degrees, people who budget, people who don't miss payments. Because the system doesn't rely on chaos. It relies on predictability. And the most predictable behavior in finance is this. When life gets stressful, people default to the minimum. Not because they're lazy, because they're human. Think about how your month actually works. Rent is fixed. Utilities are fixed. Insurance is fixed. Groceries are unavoidable. Those bills don't negotiate. So when money gets tight, and it always does at some point, the flexible bill absorbs the pressure. That flexible bill is your credit card. You tell yourself, "I'll just pay the minimum this month," because that's what the system trained you to do. The minimum payment isn't just a number, it's a behavioral anchor. It quietly tells you what's acceptable, what's normal, what's enough. Once something is labeled the minimum, paying more feels optional, even irresponsible, when you're under pressure elsewhere. That's not an accident. That's psychology. The system knows that most people don't optimize for long-term cost. They optimize for short-term relief. And the minimum payment delivers relief perfectly. It stops the calls. It stops the late fees. It stops the anxiety. For now. But every time you choose short-term relief, the long-term cost grows. This is where people get stuck in a loop they don't even realize they're in. They carry a balance. They pay the minimum. Interest eats most of the payment. The balance barely moves. Then something happens. A car repair, a medical bill, a slow month at work, an unexpected expense. So they use the card again, not because they want to, because the card is already there. And now the balance grows. But the minimum payment only rises slightly, which feels manageable, until it isn't. This is how debt becomes permanent, not through one bad decision, but through dozens of reasonable ones. The system doesn't need you to fail spectacularly. It just needs you to survive. Because survival keeps the account open. And open accounts generate interest. This is also why paying extra often feels strangely hard, even when you technically can. Paying extra doesn't just cost money. It costs psychological safety. When you send more than the minimum, you feel exposed. You feel like you're giving up flexibility. You feel like you're taking a risk. What if something comes up next week? What if you need that cash? What if you made the wrong call? The system benefits from that fear, because the minimum payment preserves optionality for you while locking in profitability for them. And notice how the language flips responsibility. If you pay only the minimum, the system says nothing. If you struggle, the system says you should budget better. If you fall behind, the system says you were irresponsible. But it never says, this structure was designed to extract maximum interest over time. That sentence never appears on a statement, and it never will. Another uncomfortable truth. Minimum payments make debt feel smaller than it really is. When the required payment is low, the balance feels abstract, distant, manageable. But the real cost isn't the balance. It's the time. Years of payments, thousands in interest, mental energy spent carrying something that never goes away. That mental load matters. People underestimate how much cognitive space debt occupies. Every decision gets filtered through it. Can I afford this? Should I wait? What if something goes wrong? Even when you're not actively thinking about the card, it's there, shaping your choices. That's part of the price. And the minimum payment keeps that price invisible. Because if people truly saw the full timeline, the total interest paid, the years spent, the opportunity cost, many would react very differently. That's why those numbers are buried, hidden in fine print, printed small, easy to ignore. Visibility would break the spell. There's a reason credit card companies don't emphasize payoff timelines. There's a reason they highlight minimums instead of totals. It's the same reason casinos focus on wins, not losses. The system survives on partial information. And once you understand that, something shifts. You stop asking, why can't I get ahead? And start asking, why does the system reward staying in debt? That question is dangerous, not for you, but for the narrative. Because it exposes the real function of minimum payments. They're not there to help you succeed. They're there to help the system extract steadily, quietly, and for as long as possible. In the next part, we're going to zoom out even further. We'll talk about how minimum payments connect to credit scores, why escaping debt can temporarily hurt you, and why so many people feel punished the moment they try to break free. And near the end, we'll talk honestly about what awareness changes and what it doesn't. Because seeing the lie doesn't magically erase the bill, but it does give you something powerful back. Choice. Here's where the minimum payment stops being just a financial trick and becomes a control mechanism. Because credit cards don't just measure risk, they shape behavior. Your credit score doesn't reward freedom, it rewards compliance. You can carry thousands, even tens of thousands, in high-interest debt and still be considered a good borrower as long as you keep paying on time. The system doesn't care whether the debt is shrinking. It only cares that the payments keep coming. That should tell you something. Paying the minimum protects your score. Paying off debt too aggressively can temporarily hurt it. Closing accounts can hurt it. Reducing available credit can hurt it. So the very actions that move you toward financial freedom can look like risk to the system. That's not a coincidence. The credit system was never built to measure health. It was built to measure predictability. And the most predictable customer is the one who pays just enough to stay trapped. This is why minimum payments feel officially endorsed. They keep your account current. They keep your score intact. They keep you inside the system's definition of responsible. But responsibility, in this context, doesn't mean escaping debt. It means servicing it reliably. Once you see that, the pressure you felt for years starts to make sense. You weren't failing. You were being optimized. Optimized for interest. Optimized for duration. Optimized for extraction. And because the system frames this as personal finance, people absorb the stress privately. They don't talk about it openly. They don't compare notes. They don't realize how common their experience actually is. So everyone thinks they're the exception. I should be further along by now. I must have messed something up. I don't understand why this is taking so long. But millions of people are asking the same questions in isolation. That isolation is part of the design. Because if everyone saw the same pattern at once, the story would change. The narrative would shift from individual responsibility to structural incentive. And that's a much harder conversation to control. The minimum payment also distorts how people think about time. It makes long-term cost invisible and short-term relief feel rational. Paying an extra few $100s toward principal feels painful now. Paying thousands more in interest over time feels abstract. Humans are bad at feeling abstract pain. Systems exploit that. So people choose relief today, even when it costs them years tomorrow. Not because they're ignorant, but because the system is built to make the trade feel reasonable. This is why so many people say, "I'll deal with it later." And then later never comes. Because later keeps moving. And the longer debt stays open, the harder it becomes to imagine life without it. The balance becomes part of your financial identity. Something you manage instead of something you eliminate. That mental shift matters. When debt becomes normal, freedom feels unrealistic. When minimum payments become routine, escape feels extreme. When everyone around you is doing the same thing, questioning it feels unnecessary. Until something breaks. Until interest rates jump. Until income drops. Until an emergency forces the math into the open. That's usually when people realize how expensive the minimum payment really was. Not just in dollars, but in years. Years of delayed choices. Years of limited flexibility. Years of background stress. Years you can't get back. The lie of the minimum payment isn't that it's illegal or hidden. It's that it's presented as help, as kindness, as a reasonable option for responsible adults. In reality, it's a mechanism that trades your future for present calm. And calm is incredibly valuable when life already feels overwhelming. That's why the lie works. The goal of understanding this isn't to panic or feel ashamed. Shame is what keeps people stuck. The goal is clarity. Clarity about why the balance didn't move. Clarity about why effort didn't translate into relief. Clarity about why doing what you were told still led here. When you understand the role of the minimum payment, you stop seeing your situation as a personal flaw. You see it as a predictable outcome of a system designed to prioritize interest over exit. That perspective doesn't magically erase debt, but it changes how you relate to it. You stop trusting the system's definition of responsible. You stop confusing compliance with progress. You stop assuming that what's easy is what's best. And even if nothing changes immediately, that shift matters. Because systems like this rely on people not asking why. They rely on routines staying routines. They rely on minimums staying unquestioned. Awareness interrupts that. If this video made you uncomfortable, that's normal. It's uncomfortable to realize that something framed as help was actually costing you far more than you were ever shown. If any part of this sounded familiar, if you've been paying a balance for years and wondering why it never seems to end, you're not alone. Say something in the comments. Not to complain, not to vent, just to acknowledge it. Because silence is what keeps this working. The minimum payment isn't a mistake. It's a strategy. And once you see the strategy, you can finally decide how much longer you want to play along.